KOCT, its board of directors, staff, and the City of Oceanside do not support nor promote any candidates. We provide the following program as a public service for voters. All candidates have been invited to participate in this program, but not all were able to or chose to do so.
Welcome to KOCT's election forum on Measure M, which would establish a tax of up to 6% on cannabis businesses in the city of Oceanside. I'm your moderator, Alison St. John, and we're glad you're joining us to hear the details of what this measure would do. It was placed on the ballot by a 4-to-1 vote of the Oceanside City Council. First, before we get going, a little background. Medicinal marijuana use was legalized in California back in 1996, and recreational use by adults was legalized in 2016, but it was only legalized for personal use, and the law left it up to local jurisdictions like Oceanside to decide how to regulate commercial use of marijuana. So since then, cities all over the state have been working on whether and how to open the door to the business of marijuana. In other words, how to regulate making money off it. In the next half hour, we'll find out how this proposed cannabis tax would fit into Oceanside's approach to lifting the ban on cannabis. I'd like to welcome our first guest, who is Mike Gossman. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
First off, I want to make the point that you are actually not advocating for Measure M. You are here simply to educate us, correct?
That is correct. So state law restricts me from doing any sort of advocacy. I can only inform and educate.
Okay, so now the City Council voted 4-to-1. The only person who opposed it was Jack Feller. Does voting in favor of this mean that a voter is in favor of legalizing cannabis?
It does not. Consumption of cannabis is already legal in California. As you stated, that was the law under Prop 64 in 2016. All this would do is allow the city to tax any business operations that relate to cannabis. Right now, there is no dispensaries. This law would not change that. The only distribution within Oceanside is medicinal and non-storefront. And there is no recreational distribution allowed within the city of Oceanside. And as I said, this would not change that. This would only allow for the taxation of what's allowed now and any future things that would be allowed down the road.
So it would tax medicinal marijuana businesses?
It would, yes.
Okay. Now, we know that other cities who are a little bit ahead of Oceanside in legalizing marijuana, for example, the city of San Diego is charging 8% tax, I believe, and Vista 7% tax. What made Oceanside decide to put 6% on the ballot?
I mean, that's been a debate, I think, across the state. What's the right level of taxation? First off, you have an industry that was largely illicit for a long time, and you're trying to bring them into the mainstream, out of the shadows, so to speak. So you don't want to overburden them with a tax that would keep them out of wanting to become legitimized. And then you have the issue about the costs that are associated with it and really finding that balance. And there are some costs associated with allowing that business into a community. So.
Well, what are those costs?
Well, those costs are, for one, it's primarily the funds would go to enforcement of the code and the restrictions that are on that business. You know, the monitoring, when any sort of cannabis business comes in, there's a lot of community concerns around it. So when you allow for a cannabis business, whether it's cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, there are certain things that you want to make sure that fit in the city. Well, that takes some enforcement. It also is a burden on our public safety. Not that the business owners are doing anything wrong, but it does attract, because of banking regulations, it still is a very cash-intense business. And anytime you have a cash-intense business, you're going to have, some special enforcement associated with that. So those are just some examples of the increased level of costs associated with that.
So you say you're hoping to bring the business out of the shadows, but some people might argue, why do you want to bring it out of the shadows?
You don't want any business to be, run illegally. Like, for one, it's very difficult to enforce or ensure that it is being done properly if it's done behind closed doors, so to speak, or without any regulation or enforcement from the city. And as I said, it's already legalized. The recreational use of cannabis, medicinal use of cannabis, has been legal for in one way, shape, or form since 1996. So it's out there. Now it's how do we go about enforcing it?
How much money would it raise for the city if it were to pass this measure?
That's something that we had some tax consultants look at, and they estimate, and it's an estimate of between $1.5 to $1.9 million a year.
And how significant is that for the city? I mean, the city's got a budget of what, $155 or so million a year or so. So how significant is less than $2 million?
It's significant in the sense that it's going to be focused on certain things. And I mean, the reality is there's an unlimited, want by the community, by residents, by citizens, and what they want the city to do for them, whether it's bathrooms at parks, et cetera, or more police on the streets, more firefighters. This all just kind of allows us to do a little bit more around that. But also, as I said, a big piece of it will go to actually enforcing what the businesses that are allowed, the regulations and the rules and the zoning associated with that.
So I can see somebody who decided it would be a good idea to vote for it in order to pay for some more police enforcement. But I do have a question in my mind as to what is to stop the city from using it for something else, for example, pensions. That could be something that people would be afraid of. It'll just get sucked into the pension pool.
It is a general fund tax, and it will go into the general fund. Pension obligations that are here are a requirement of the city, and all staff costs has a portion that is related to pension, well, full-time and part-time staff.
What is the current tax in Oceanside on alcohol? How does it compare with that?
The current tax on alcohol is just the regular sales tax that you have. We don't have any special tax on alcohol. There are excise taxes both at the federal and state level on alcohol, and they're fairly significant, and certainly the alcohol distributors, whether it's the manufacturers, the distributors, or the retail, definitely feel a piece of that. But there is no special tax, so it is different from alcohol in that way.
What about this argument that when you add all the taxes that are being imposed, because there's all these different stages of the marijuana business, from cultivation to distribution and sale and manufacture, and at each stage they would get 6% tax. So that when it's all added up along with the state tax of 15%, it could be a pretty significant tax. Is that fair to be taxing this new product so heavily?
I would leave that question of fairness up to the voters. I would say that pointing it out, that is a reality of it, is certainly fair, and I think there are going to be some voters who say, look, if you want to do business and you want to do cannabis business in my city, I expect that you're going to have to pay. And there may be others who take the side of, no, that's not fair, and I am not going to authorize that through my vote. So that's one that decision of fairness. That I'll leave up to the voters.
Okay. Does the city get any of the 15% tax that the state already levels on the marijuana business?
Not directly. We don't get a cut of that particular tax.
You don't?
It would be too complicated for me at this point to see how that might filter down in some other way. I don't know, but it's not a direct allocation.
And why is it that the cultivation it's being proposed a lesser tax of up to 3.5% in Oceanside?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what the rationale behind that was. I'd have to find that out.
Okay. I mean, I know that there are a lot of farmers in Oceanside that are desperately hoping that this will keep them in farming.
Yes.
So maybe Oceanside is motivated to keep the cultivation side going, and the other aspects, including selling it, is less easy to accept.
I think that's part of it. I think that when you take just the cultivation piece, it's not a finished product that's ready to go. It doesn't have the same impacts to the community that some other form of, whether it's distribution or manufacturing, tends to be in an area where you're not going to have as many impacts from smell, which does exist when you have any sort of business related to cannabis. So that is probably part of the rationale.
And then this is probably going to apply, at least in the meantime, mainly to people who are using medicinal marijuana, correct? Because the most marijuana in Oceanside is medicinal at the moment. The only thing that's legal for recreational is the cultivation.
When you're talking about, storefront, which we don't have, but we do allow in the city delivery of medicinal, so it would be impacted by that. But as far as the manufacture, cultivation, it would have more of an impact on the medicinal side initially, depending on what happens down the road, of course.
Will this measure need 50% to pass or 2/3 to pass?
It's a general tax, so it needs 50%.
It only needs 50%,
Yeah.
not 2/3.
Yes.
So if it were to fail, do you foresee that having let me ask it this
Yeah.
way, if it were to pass or if it were to fail, how do you think that would affect the speed with which marijuana becomes legalized?
I think that it would certainly slow it down in terms of not having the bandwidth and the infrastructure to do the city side. Anytime you start a new business, there's a city side component of permitting that business. Not having the resources with which to do that and enforce that would certainly make the city take a position of, look, we need to be able to enforce this. Without the resources that we have available to us to do that, that's gonna slow down.
Okay. And then if Vista has already passed a 7% tax, what are the implications for the business of marijuana in Oceanside if this were to fail?
Because from a competitive perspective with Vista, like if I was a business person, I would probably head toward the city that had the smaller tax. But then there's that question that we just discussed about whether or not, how quickly would I be able to get my business up and running? Because to any of us, but especially to business people, time is money, and the amount of time that it takes to get your business up and running, permitted, et cetera, is going to have an impact on your bottom line. So I think that there's two sides to that coin.
Okay. Because I do think it's confusing for people to notice that the people who are in favor of this tax are, in some cases, not in favor of legalizing marijuana.
Yes, that is very much the case, and that's why I think it's really important to point out that this doesn't change the legality of what the voters have already approved in terms of use, et cetera. But it certainly has an impact on, it's left up to each jurisdiction to decide what types of use are going to be allowed, which is can be a little confusing because it really is a patchwork all across the state with different levels of tax. And unlike other businesses, right, where it's done more uniformly. But that was a decision by the state. Cities and counties always appreciate local control, but it can be confusing, so it is our job to try to clarify that as much as possible.
Well, a lot to think about for the voter.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank you very much, Mike, for helping us to understand this.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We've been speaking with Assistant City Manager of Oceanside, Mike Gossman. And stay with us. Coming up, we'll be speaking with somebody who is opposed to Measure M.
We are the voice of North County. We are KOCT. Go to koct.org and show your support.
Welcome back to KOCT's forum on Measure M, the measure that would implement a tax of up to 6% on the various aspects of marijuana business in the city of Oceanside. And our guest now is opposed to Measure M. He is Dave Newman, and he is a small business owner, a cannabis advocate, and you are not in favor of Measure M. I would like to welcome you to the program.
Thank you for having me, Allison. Yes, no, I'm not in favor of Measure M. I have owned my own cannabis nursery for 10 years, registered as a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation. We were the first cannabis business to be accepted as members of the San Diego County Farm Bureau. I currently sit on the board of Oceanside for a Safer Community. Our goal is to bring sensible cannabis regulations to Oceanside and North County. We were the first cannabis organization to walk in the Independence Day Parade here in Oceanside. I consult for the business, and I speak regularly, holding seminars and workshops on how to cultivate your own cannabis at home.
Okay, well, I'd like to just make a quick note to our viewers, which is that the measure was put on the ballot by a 4-to-1 vote of the City Council. Jack Feller was the City Councilman who voted against it because I think he opposes legalizing marijuana. But you, Dave, are actually opposed to the measure for very different reasons, right?
I am, yes. Unfortunately, this measure without an adult use aspect here in Oceanside, it really puts the burden of taxes on the medical marijuana users, those who actually keep their medical marijuana recommendation because they need it. I'm also opposed because of the multi-tiered taxation on the product. As it moves through the chain of distribution and manufacturing and cultivation, it's taxed on every level. So it's not really just 6%. That tax adds up, and depending on where it moves through the chain, could be anywhere from 15% to 30%. You add state taxes on top of that, you're looking at anywhere from 38% up to 50% tax on a single product.
So just to clarify that, the state is actually also putting a 15% tax on all the businesses.
Yes, every business pays the 15% excise tax from the state, as well as their 8% sales tax. So that gets on top.
And I think a lot of people are unaware of the fact that there are so many steps in the process, you know, from
There are.
cultivation to distribution, to manufacture, and then the final sale. And at each step, they would be taxed up to 6%, correct?
Cultivation could be taxed up to 3.5%. Otherwise, yes, the other aspects would be taxed up to 6%. So as it leaves cultivation, it's 3.5%. Goes to distribution, there's a 6%. Distribution goes to manufacturing, there's 6%. Manufacturing goes back to distribution, there's 6%. Distribution goes to retail, there's 6%. Retail goes to Joe Consumer, that's us, and we're the ones ultimately going to be paying those taxes. Businesses do not pay those taxes, they pass them on to the consumer.
So you're suggesting that people who are using the marijuana products are paying up to 50% tax when all is said and done.
Absolutely.
However, you know, you look at like other cities in the region, City of San Diego is taxing up to 8% now, I believe, and Vista is 7%. Oceanside is proposing 6%, which is pretty competitive, I would say. I mean, isn't that acceptable?
That being said, San Diego doesn't have a tax for medical users. It's all adult use. In Oceanside, without an adult use aspect, as I mentioned earlier, you're really only taxing the medical patients. So that alone is a slight problem. Obviously for us, I mean, if you're a medical patient, you need it for a specific purpose. You're hanging on to that recommendation because you need it. So to put the tax burden on them and them alone is not necessarily acceptable for us.
What about the idea that people who consume marijuana should pay their fair share? You know, they should pay some kind of tax.
Yeah, I hear this, their fair share. I'm wondering what their fair share is. Why are they paying their fair share? What's wrong with them? Why are they bad people? Why aren't the bars paying their fair share? I own a bar. I don't pay any special tax. Liquor stores aren't paying any special tax. Why is it that this category has to pay this special tax? Their fair share? For the last 80 plus years, the African American communities and Latino communities have been unfairly victimized by poor cannabis laws. I think they've paid their fair share. I think they've done it. So why we continue to burden them with their fair share, whatever that means, I don't understand.
So I understand that this is also going to be imposed on CBD products as well.
Absolutely, industrial hemp gets it as well. The only place it doesn't get it is at the farmers, the cultivators. They don't pay the tax, but it does get lumped in with everything else, as we mentioned, through that supply chain.
Why would you argue that CBD products shouldn't be taxed? But they are not the same as THC-containing products, correct?
That's correct. It doesn't have the psychoactive properties that THC does. Again, making it even more of a harmless product, quite frankly. So again, I don't see this burdensome tax needs to be applied to these consumers.
Now, one of the very strong arguments, I think, that makes a lot of people feel like this is a good idea is that it would help fund enforcement of public safety. And I think a lot of people are concerned that with marijuana becoming more available, the police are going to be having extra work. So they argue that this tax is what will be used to cover that. How would you respond to that?
Well, unfortunately, it's all evidence to the contrary. We haven't seen, you don't open the paper every day and see police having to enforce anything special. And as a matter of fact, back in 2011, the RAND Corporation did a study that was followed up just a few years ago by USC, UC Irvine, UCLA, which all performed a study on dispensaries and their effects on violent crime, personal property crime, and illicit drug use crime in neighboring or in nearby neighborhoods. They saw that it all decreased almost immediately, and as these dispensaries were shuttered, the crime came back almost immediately.
Is there some kind of an argument about being competitive with the black market? Because obviously one of the issues as marijuana becomes legalized is that there is a black market. It exists whether we legalize it or not. How would a 6% tax affect the ability of legalized marijuana producers to compete with the black market?
Oh, well, obviously, the more taxes you tack onto this, the more likely you're going to bolster the black market. People simply can't afford a 50% tax. It's ridiculous. A lot of people just don't want to pay it because it's taxation without representation. That being said, you are going to do nothing but help the black market at this point.
Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you could argue that a lot of people who are using marijuana products, for example, seniors, are really not interested in going to the black market. They don't want to break the law. They want to be legal. They would like to have a legal way to obtain it. And so perhaps the black market is really not such a big issue in this argument. It's
certain that a lot of people don't want to use the black market, and that's understandable. That being said, we're not really doing anything here to squelch that. At this point, you can pick up the phone and have a delivery service to your home within minutes. And again, we don't see in the paper every day that someone was robbed by a delivery service or broken into or anything, quite frankly. It's almost null and void. I know people who have spoken to OPD about it, and they really have no records of any type of disturbance in that area.
Mm. Bearing in mind that you are an advocate of legalizing marijuana, that does seem to be, taxing it does seem to be one of the main incentives for people to say, yes, let's legalize it so we can earn the taxes and it'll help the revenue for the city. Doesn't that disturb you that if this measure fails, that could slow down the acceptance of legalized marijuana in Oceanside?
Yes and no. That being said, we're not necessarily opposed to a tax. At this point, the city takes in top taxes for short-term vacation rentals and hotels, motels. We're talking a 1.5% for short-term vacation rentals, 2.5% for hotels, motels. Yet we want to tack on a 30-something% up to 50% on medical marijuana businesses. I think providing a small tax is one thing, but overburdening them is another. At this point, even in the rebuttal to the argument against Measure M, it says right there in black and white, we want to make this unprofitable for cannabis businesses so they don't want to locate in Oceanside.
Is there any tax that you would consider would be reasonable then, where people could operate and still make a profit?
Sure, why not have it be the same as the hotels, the tot taxes, 1.5%, 2.5%. 6% is excessive.
Well, you might argue then that people would come flooding to Oceanside because, you've got a 7% tax in Vista, and so some people might be concerned that that would provide a very big incentive for marijuana producers to come to Oceanside.
Right, which is why you have limitations. At this point, limitations are built into zoning. Everything is specified for the light industrial zones other than cultivation. And if anybody knows anything about Oceanside, we have a very small percentage of leases available that would fit the criteria, being A, it has to be in a light industrial zone, B, you have landlords who don't want to rent to the cannabis industry, so it brings down your vacancy rate, You have landlords that have loans on their property and can't rent to the cannabis business, so that brings down your vacancy rate some more. You have setbacks, 1,000 feet from parks, schools, beaches, air, everything. So you're looking at about a 0.5% vacancy rate in Oceanside. That's how they're doing it now. You get somebody say, look, we're only going to allow so many businesses in Oceanside. I realize it's not necessarily a free market, but we do want to maintain control without stifling.
So if Measure M were to fail, you would be pleased. Some people might say that it would slow down the legalization of cannabis in Oceanside, but what would you suggest would be the next step?
Reevaluating this tax plan. Again, it doesn't need to be so aggressive. And again, as we see with the rebuttal to the argument against Measure M, it's really just being used as a tool to keep the market out and to stifle the market that's here.
And so finally, can you just summarize how you would like to see the evolution of legalization of recreational marijuana? Because medicinal marijuana is legal in Oceanside, right? But the recreational use of it, can you just summarize what is and is not legal right now?
Okay, well, at this point, Oceanside still has still doesn't have dispensaries.
True.
So it kind of has medical marijuana, but not really. I mean, we can manufacture it, we can distribute it, we can cultivate it, but we can't sell it here. So in all intents and purposes, Oceanside doesn't have medical marijuana. What we need to do is go back to the drawing board, speak with our representatives, and come up with a plan so that we can control, regulate, and properly tax an adult use and medical use industry here in Oceanside, bringing valuable jobs. These people will spend money here in Oceanside. We don't have affordable housing, so we need jobs that can pay an affordable wage, and that's where the cannabis industry comes in.
Okay, well, Dave, I'd like to thank you very much for giving us your perspective.
Thank you very much for having me.
We've been speaking with David Newman, who is a small business owner and an opponent of Measure M. And remember to vote and get your ballot in plenty of time. Every registered voter will receive a mail-in ballot the week of October the 5th. You can track your ballot every step of the way till it's counted at sdvote.com. Polling places will be open for 4 days leading up to Election Day. You can either drop off your filled-in ballot there or exchange your mail-in ballot for a paper ballot and vote in person. You can also drop off your mail-in ballot earlier at one of 4 drop-off locations around Oceanside. They'll all be staffed by election workers. And of course, you can mail in your ballot. So you have plenty of options. The main thing is to use your vote. I'm Alison St. John, and thank you so much for watching KOCT's Election Forums.